Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're having folks come on. Hi, Andrew. How are you? Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Again, we're going to start in just a little bit. Just want you to have some patience. We are going to get started in just a few minutes while we wait for folks to join us. This is the Secular Speaker Series. Today, we're going to be hosting Andrew Seidel. Ooh, my background there. You see. Of course, I have a copy of my book, The Founding Myth, handy. If you don't have a copy of this book, I highly recommend getting this. Hey.
You there?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, there we go. All right.
Good. We're just wait a few minutes. I'm just showing everybody.
Yeah, take your
the
time.
book.
Let's let everybody get in.
Yep.
For sure.
We should be gathering an audience on Facebook as well.
Cool. I love the background. Very nice.
Thank you. Yeah, it's our new logo. We just started it up this year. It's very powerful, I think.
It's awesome. I love it. I love the look of it. Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, thank you. One of our board members designed it. His name's Robert. I don't know if you've met him before, Robert Peoples.
I think I met everybody when I was there in December.
Oh yeah.
But yes, I remember Lindsay.
She has the panelist link. She's trying really hard not to be on the screen, and every time she logs in, she gets the panelist.
That's quite all right.
Yes. So let's see we're just short of 2 o'clock, so we'll just wait a few more minutes.
Yeah, take your time. I always figure it's better for me to get in early because you get in and then something happens to the internet. We have a huge thunderstorm going on right now, so fingers crossed that we don't get a limb knocking a wire down somewhere. It's that kind of storm, so we'll see.
Good times. I hope so too.
How have you been? It's been a while since we chatted.
Yeah, well, I've been doing well out here. I don't know. There's our legislature just finally is closer to finishing. They had adjourned for a little while, and they came back. And in an interesting thing, the Senate came back and said, we're done. And the House came back and said, we're not done. So we've had a period of about 10 days where the House actually came back and did some business this week. But it's nothing too controversial, so that's good.
Make life exciting for you.
It's been a roller coaster for us, but yeah, life is good. Went hiking down in the Chiricahuas a couple weekends ago. Yeah, I don't know if you've been down there. I know you enjoy that.
I did once. It was a long time ago. Yeah, it must have been like 2006 when I was down there. They're so cool though. That's such a beautiful area.
So cool. Southern Arizona is really beautiful. Really beautiful. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. When we would get those really cold days up in Flagstaff, or there'd be a snowstorm coming where they're 30 feet of snow. We're we'll go south for the weekend and see what happens.
Well, everyone, I see we're getting more and more people joining us. I just want to welcome you. And it is 2 o'clock, so I'm just going to say to everyone, thank you for joining us. This is our Secular Speaker Series. And I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Just want to make sure everyone sees the little Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You can click Q&A and type in your question, and I will be more than happy to bring those questions to Andrew. Also, if you're watching us on Facebook, you can ask your questions through the chat box there, and we will get them here as well. So that is how we're going to be working this today with our Q&A. So without further ado, I would like to officially start this meeting and welcome our guest speaker today, author of this amazing book, which I have read now 3 times.
Oh my gosh.
Myths. I know, and audio too.
Wow. Thank you, Tori. You're the one. No.
I definitely have listened to it and read it a few times. Why Christian nationalism is un-American. I'm having trouble with my background. Yes.
Zoom's doing such a good job.
I know. So the Director of Strategic Responses with the Freedom from Religion Foundation, Mr. Andrew Seidel, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, it is my pleasure.
Yeah, so glad to have you. I am going to take my video off so you get the full screen.
Okay.
And thank you very much. Welcome.
It's my pleasure. So it really is a pleasure to join you all today. Welcome to my home. It is a pleasure to have you here. You are actually sitting perched atop the desk where I wrote most of the founding myth. I really wish that I could be there with you, but I'm actually kind of excited because I think we're going to have a little bit more of intimate exchange here. And the question that we need to ask today is, do we have a government of the people, for the people, and by the people? Or is ours a government of the Christians and for the Christians and by the Christians? That is the battle that we are in right now. America is in a desperate fight against Christian nationalism, a political theology that is an existential threat to the Republic. And that is why I wrote the founding myth. And that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. And then I'll talk a little bit about Ffrf and the work that we are doing to fight Christian nationalism. So for those of you who don't know, Christian nationalism it's not a scholarly debate. It is a sinister exclusionary movement. The goal is to redefine America according to the Christian nationalist identity, and then to reshape and rewrite the laws accordingly. So Christian nationalism is the idea that America was founded as a Christian nation, or that we were based on Judeo-Christian principles. And the most important aspect of that Christian nationalism ideology is that we've strayed from that foundation. We've gotten away from our godly roots. And Christian nationalists use the language of return to justify all manner of hateful and absurd public policy. Now, there have been waves of Christian nationalism throughout American history, but it seized power for the first time, really, in my lifetime, in 2016. One of the best predictors of a Trump voter in 2016, better than being an evangelical, better than being a white evangelical, was thinking that the United States was founded as a Christian nation. So Trump tapped into this undercurrent of fearful Christian nationalism that was roiling through our society, and then he wrote it into the most powerful office in the history of the world. And now his administration is implementing all manner of Christian nationalist public policy and putting upwards of 200 Christian nationalist judges on the federal bench with lifetime appointments. The Muslim ban, great example of Christian nationalism written into public policy. People tend to forget that not only did that ban immigration from several Muslim majority countries, it also favored immigration for Christians. The child separation policy at our border is explicitly Christian nationalist. A lot of people forget that Attorney General Jeff Sessions justified throwing kids in cages by citing the Bible, by citing Romans chapter 13. He learned to do that in the White House Bible study, which is a thing. The opposition to LGBTQ equality is almost exclusively Christian nationalist, as is the opposition to reproductive rights and justice. Something you may be more familiar with in Arizona is Project Blitz. This is a state-level push, again, explicitly Christian nationalist. And what they try to do is pass these laws that are sort of ceremonial, getting In God We Trust in the public schools, displayed in the public schools, getting the Bible taught historically in the public schools, things like that. And then they work their way up into more sinister and harmful laws, eventually giving people a license to discriminate in the name of their God, giving Christians a license to discriminate in the name of their God. Their religion is becoming law. So hopefully that's terrifying to everybody watching this, that there's really good news, real good news, not their version of good news. The very identity of the Christian nationalist depends on certain lies and myths. Things like one nation under God, like in God we trust, like the Declaration of Independence referencing the Christian God 4 different times, that the founding fathers were all evangelical Christians, that they prayed at the Constitutional Convention when they were writing our Constitution, that George Washington got down on his knees in the snow at Valley Forge and knelt and said a prayer. And my least favorite / most favorite, that our laws are based on the 10 Commandments. Without the historical cover that these lies give, and they are all lies, their policy justifications begin to crumble. Without that commonwealth of myths, their identity begins to wither and fade. So their entire political and ideological reality is actually incredibly weak and vulnerable because it is based on these historical distortions and lies. The problem is for us that we need more than facts to fight back. Facts are not enough anymore. In the age of Trump, you need more than facts. What we really need are better arguments. And that is the purpose of the founding myth, to bury Christian nationalism. It's a simple but lofty goal. I'm trying to utterly destroy this un-American political ideology. So this book is not simply a refutation of the idea that we're a Christian nation. Instead, I wanted to go deeper. So I asked the question, did Judeo-Christian principles positively influence the founding of the United States of America? No, they did not. America was not founded on Judeo-Christian principles, whatever that might be. Feel free to ask a question about that later. And it's actually a good thing that we weren't founded on those principles, because Judeo-Christian principles, and especially those that are central to Christian nationalism, are fundamentally opposed to the values and the principles on which this great nation was built. The two systems differ and conflict to such a degree that, to put it bluntly, Christianity is un-American. Now, another way of saying that is that America will never be a Christian nation, because the moment it becomes a Christian nation, it will cease to be America. So this is the argument I make in the founding myth, that there are these two conflicting systems, that they have irreconcilable differences. That is the founding myth. Now, to make that argument, I kind of broke the book up into 4 different parts. And there are going to be some readings today. So if you are one of those people who has, nightmares from church still, I apologize in advance. The first part of the book is sort of our pre-constitutional history. It's all about the founding fathers and the Declaration of Independence and the colonies. And I'm really trying to give you better arguments in addition to real historical facts, so that we can push back against this Christian nationalism. So one of the things that I love to debate and talk about, and if we were there and we were out at a bar after my talk and somebody bought me a scotch or something like that, we could go on for 8 or 9 hours with this. But what religion were the founding fathers, if any? What did they actually believe? And what I think we need to do is stop having that argument as it relates to Christian nationalism, because it doesn't matter.
You hear
because
me?
I can hear you.
Oh, yeah. Hey. Oh, hi. Okay.
So, because even if all of the founding fathers were evangelical Christians, Jesus rose from the dead, Bible-believing evangelical Christians, that still wouldn't prove that America was founded as a Christian nation or that we were built on Judeo-Christian principles. The Christian nationalist has to find a principle that positively influenced the United States of America, that is unique and original to Christianity, to show that we were based on their principles. And that can't be done. So I think we ought to stop having that argument. And that's something I get into while also getting into the religion and the beliefs of the founding fathers in the book. I also go over the Declaration of Independence, whether or not it's a founding document, what that might mean, the 4 references that supposedly invoke the Christian God. I go over every one of them, how they made it in to the document. And then I look at some of the really popular colonial myths. For instance, I imagine most people watching were taught at some point in their, at least if they went to American schools, that the settlers at Plymouth and the Puritans and the Pilgrims came here seeking religious freedom or religious liberty. And that's not really true. It's kind of true. They fled religious persecution, but they weren't seeking religious freedom or religious liberty. When they got here, they established a theocracy and they imposed their religion on everybody in their geographical range as quickly as they possibly could, and it made everybody miserable. They weren't seeking religious liberty, they were fleeing religious persecution. And in fact, I actually point out in the book that they had religious liberty because they didn't flee right to the New World. They actually fled to the Netherlands, to Leiden, which at the time was the most liberal country, probably in the world, certainly in Europe, where they had a certain amount of religious liberty. They called it tolerance back then. And so many people were leaving the religion that the fathers of this sect said, you know, we got to get out of here. When people have religious freedom, they're leaving. We got to get to a place where we can enforce our religion using the secular law. So that's what they did. They fled, and then they established these little theocracies. So not quite true. And when the founding fathers drafted our Constitution, they looked back on that and they said, we don't want to do that. That's a really bad way. Don't do it. So that's part one of the book. Part two is called United States versus the Bible. You know, lawyers, we take cases. It's always somebody versus somebody. And in there, I really start to get into the different principles of the Bible and of Christianity and compare them to our founding principles. So for instance, the idea of hell, which is basically invented by Christianity, at least as a place of eternal torture and torment. And the idea embodied in the Eighth Amendment that we will prohibit cruel and unusual punishment. Those two ideas really cannot possibly ever agree. The idea of original sin, and then the American presumption of innocence, innocent until proven guilty, right? Again, two ideas that fundamentally conflict. You can't reconcile them. And it gets worse. I mean, the idea of personal responsibility, which is both throughout pretty much every system that we have here in America, justice, economic, you name it, compared to the idea of vicarious redemption through human sacrifice, which lies at the center of Christianity. And so I'm going to do a short reading from this part of the book. This is from chapter 10. It's Redemption and Original Sin, or Personal Responsibility and the Presumption of Innocence. So I'm going to hold it up like this so it kind of looks like I'm looking at you. The American system of justice and government, and perhaps our entire society, rest on the principle that people are personally responsible for their actions. The entire Christian religion is based on a singular claim that violates the principle of personal responsibility, so critical to those systems. The idea that Jesus died for your sins. Christianity's rejection of personal responsibility is actually twofold. First, a person is guilty of original sin simply because they were born. To believe this, you must accept not only that all humans descended from two originals that a God created for his garden, but also that all human beings are culpable for the actions of those two forebears, whose disobedience was prompted by a talking snake and was committed millennia ago. Guilt without action is rare under our system of law, but it is the law in much of Christianity. Second, the sacrifice of Jesus means that one's sins are forgiven. This is vicarious redemption through human sacrifice, Jesus as a sacrificial scapegoat. Each idea is repugnant to American principles in its own way. Original sin confers guilt without regard for personal actions, while vicarious redemption absolves that guilt through the torture and murder of another human. So that's part two. And part three of the book is really kind of where this book began, because I heard while I was getting my master's of law, which I got after my law degree, that a Supreme Court justice had written that our laws were influenced, if not based on, the Ten Commandments. And I thought, well, that can't be right. I mean, I've read the Bible, I've read the Ten Commandments. I'm pretty sure that can't be right. And I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write a law review article explaining why this justice got it wrong. And I started writing that law review article, and it just got really out of hand really fast. Ended up with a whole book on it. Now, every one of the Ten Commandments, every one, even the ones that you're thinking of, what about that? Every one of them violate American values and principles and would violate the Constitution if they were instituted today. Yes, every single one, even the one that you're saying, well, what about that one? But you have to buy the book to find out why that particular one. I'm not going to read that one to you. But this is a common argument you hear. I see it online. I've heard it from elected officials all across the country, that our law is based on the 10 Commandments, and it's nonsense. And when you're presented with that, one of the first questions that you need to ask is, okay, well, which 10 Commandments? Because that's a question that most people don't have an answer for. There are 4 sets of 10 Commandments in any given Bible. Deuteronomy 5, Deuteronomy 27, Exodus 20, and Exodus 34. And then different religions interpret them differently too. The difference between prohibiting murder and prohibiting killing is the difference between being able to protect yourself if somebody breaks into your house in the middle of the night and not. The difference between graven images and idols, well, actually, I don't really know what the difference is, and I don't really care, but Christianity did. It actually had a civil war over the difference between graven images and idols in the 8th and 9th century called the Iconoclast controversy. So it's a big deal. So which 10 Commandments is a question you really ought to ask anytime you're presented with this. And I'm going to read just a touch from chapter 13, which is entitled, Which 10? The 10 Commandments, also known as the Decalogue, supposedly the most moral law known to humanity, and supposedly authored by the biblical God himself, are not easy to find. They're not at the beginning of the Bible. God didn't give the rules to Eve and Adam even after their fall, nor did he give them to Noah after exterminating all human and animal life save Noah's crew. And Noah needed a bit of moral guidance. Noah's son, Ham, accidentally walks in on Noah drunk, naked, and passed out. Refusing to take responsibility for his frat boy behavior, Noah curses an innocent child, Canaan, Ham's son and Noah's own grandson, to a life of slavery for Ham's crime of seeing Noah naked. This was the only man this God thought moral enough to save from a worldwide flood. Yahweh did not see fit to give out the laws, his most moral laws, if Christian nationalists are to be believed, until much further along in the biblical storyline. The first set, there are 4, doesn't appear until halfway through the second book of the Bible, Exodus. H.L. Mencken reportedly once quipped, "Say what you will about the 10 Commandments, you must always come back to the pleasant fact that there are only 10 of them." If this wit does indeed belong to Mencken, then so does the error. There are not 10 commandments, but 4 different sets of 10 commandments. So that's the first question that you need to ask. Now, the last part of the book, part 4, is American verbiage, argument by idiom. And this is probably, I'm kind of bitter that I had to write this part of the book because these arguments are so bad, but they're probably the most popular arguments you hear. So I actually did have to write this part of the book. So this is the section where we get into In God We Trust, One Nation Under God, So Help Me God, all that nonsense, God Bless America, all that nonsense verbiage that you constantly hear thrown back at you to say that this is a Christian nation. None of those are from the founding era, which is a really great thing to point out. But again, you need better arguments to push back against this. And all of those actually show that Christian nationalists use time of national fear to impose their religion on everyone else. And that's really the argument that we need to be making, that those do not evidence our founding values. They are actually evidence of Christian nationalists taking advantage of times of national fear and crisis to impose their religion on the rest of the country. And I tell the stories behind each of those phrases, how we got them, in the book. One came up during the Civil War, one came up during the Red Scare when we were actually being sold religion by madmen. And then the final one of them also dates back to what was, until this president, one of the biggest scandals in the history of the American presidency. So I don't think you've read a book like The Founding Myth. It really is different. Previous books have offered this gentle correction to the Christian nationalist, right? Here's what history says, you guys. Here's what history tells us. Here's what the founding fathers actually meant. And they've kind of left it at that. But correction is not enough because facts are not enough. Otherwise, we wouldn't have President Trump. So pointing out errors is insufficient. So this book does that, but then it takes the next step. It goes on the offensive because patriotism has no religion, right? This is a book that is an assault on the Christian nationalist identity. Not only are Christian nationalists wrong, their beliefs and identity run counter to the ideals on which this great nation was founded. So Christian nationalists and Christian nationalism is un-American. And I really want to drive that point home. I know it makes people probably squeamish to hear that word sometimes. There's a big value judgment written into the word un-American, but they really are trying to rewrite the American identity in terms of their religion. That is the underlying goal. So that to be an American is to be a Christian, and to be a Christian is to be an American. And that is what we need to be pushing back against, and that's what I'm trying to do in the founding myth. So as America nears the tipping point at which Christianity's power and privilege are reduced to equality, the Christian nation myths are going to be trumpeted, no pun intended, with renewed vigor. The Christian nationalist is not going to go gently into the obsolescence for which they are bound. They have grown accustomed to religious privilege. They're used to imposing their beliefs on unsuspecting school children. They expect politicians to pay lip service to their deity. They demand acknowledgments of their God on government property. But that time is ending. The end of Christian privilege really is near, but you have to fight. And as progress marches on, the lies exposed in this book are going to be professed more often, more loudly, and with more desperation. You must be prepared to refute them factually and vocally. So the founding myth gives you the facts and it gives you better arguments, but you really are responsible for the rest. Outspoken resistance, James Madison liked to say, is the first duty of citizens. It's a duty. Christian nationalists have persuaded too many Americans to abandon our heritage, to spurn our secular foundations in favor of their myth. America invented the separation of state and church. That's an American original. The idea was born in the Enlightenment, but it was first implemented in the American experiment. It's time to reclaim that heritage and bury their lies. This is not a Christian nation. Our Constitution does not belong to the Christian nationalists. It belongs to we the people, all of the people. And it's about damn time that we take it back. Thank you.
All right. Hey, thank you. Well, that was just wonderful. And we do have some questions coming in, so let me get started.
I'd really love to answer any questions people have. I'd love to talk about Ffrf too, so you don't have to limit your questions to just the founding myth. Please ask anything you're interested in. And sadly, I'm not there in person to sign books. I'm not there in person to even sell books, which is actually pretty devastating to new authors like myself. Sales have kind of plummeted. If you are a bibliophile like me and you cherished signed books or first editions or the smell of historic archives and bound volumes, you can actually get a signed copy through the Ffrf store. So if you go to ffrf.org, you can find the founding myth. And when you're checking out, there's a place where you can leave a note and just say, I'd like Andrew to sign the book, or signed copy, please, something like that. And then they'll stack them up and I'll go in once every week or two and sign all the books and get them out to you. You can also order online from other places, if you don't care about getting it signed. Obviously, Amazon. Bookshop.org is another really cool place. It's an online bookstore that supports local independent bookstores, and you can actually choose the local bookstore to support. And it's cheaper, and Amazon's cheaper and faster, but you can all supporting local bookshops is always a good idea. So bookshop.org if you don't care about getting a signed copy.
Yeah, and you can also buy the audiobook like I did.
That too, yeah.
And I listened to it on my drive from Phoenix to San Francisco last summer.
Nice.
I stopped by Kingman on my way there, and I used some of the talking points I had just heard when I gave a talk to the Kingman Freethinkers.
Great.
Speaking of Kingman, Mark Niski is he's the founder of the Kingman Freethinkers, and he recently brought up a point that the neighbor city to them, which is Bullhead City is, they just voted, I think this was last week or the week prior, it's very recent. They just voted to put In God We Trust in the local city council chambers. What would your reaction to that be? I think this is actually the first time we've seen this happen in Arizona. And I know Diane's on. I could open up her audio if she wants to speak. So Diane, let me know if you want to speak, our legal counsel here. But what do you recommend, Andrew, what can we be doing about this, and how can we keep this from happening in other cities? And what do you recommend? What are your thoughts on that?
It's a great question. So I talk a little bit about this in the book, in that chapter. And unfortunately, courts have said that this is not really a violation of the Constitution because it's not really a religious statement, which is, I mean, absurd. We all saying that you trust in God is only a religious statement, nothing else. So it's really, really difficult to challenge, which is why it's so important that we challenge these small violations whenever we see them, because now that those court decisions are being used to justify other larger violations of the Constitution. But just because courts have okayed it doesn't mean you can't stop it and shouldn't try to stop it. We have seen success at the Freedom from Religion Foundation and in groups across the country who have mobilized on the ground, local and vocal opposition to these pushes. They have been stopped. It can be done, but you have to get in early, and you have to be really diligent about visiting your city council meetings and speaking out against these issues. There's actually a group dedicated, they're based near Sacramento, just to getting these plaques put up in every city council chambers, county council chambers, whatever it is, across the country. That's their only goal. So, you know, we don't have something like that on our side that's dedicated to just that one tiny little issue. So it can be done. We've seen it done, but it takes a lot of work on the ground. Of course, FFRF is absolutely willing to help on that. We've got a lot of the arguments. A lot of the arguments are in the founding myth. And we are happy to write letters and explain why this is a problem and give you a lot of the data to help make these arguments. But really, to be able to do it, you've got to mobilize vocal local activism. And even if it's just one or two of you, it's still worth doing. Don't let them know that this is not their country, that there are other people who believe different things here. I mean, really, they're going around marking their territory like dogs, and they need to be stopped. And the only way to do that is to push back against it. You're on mute, Tori.
I just, wanted you to be able to speak.
Happens to everybody all the time.
Okay, I'm going to ask you next a question that came from our Facebook Live post. Yeah. This is from Jason Brooks. Jason asks, Andrew, what kinds of actions should voters be engaged in to help fight these myths?
That's a great question. I believe that voting by mail is a secular issue. I believe that registering voters is a secular issue. I think it's really important for secular groups to get involved in that, especially local secular groups. FFRF pushed for a vote by mail campaign. We've been asking all 30,000 plus of our members to call their members of Congress and demand funding for national vote by mail for every single state for 2020. I live in Wisconsin, and we had an election on April 7th. And even though I requested my absentee ballot on time, it didn't come before the election. And the Supreme Court of the United States and of Wisconsin told me that I had to go vote in person in the middle of a pandemic and risk my life just to go vote. So, it really is a critical issue. And I think it will help coalesce some secular voting power, which we've seen increasing in every election over the past decade. And definitely want to see that trend continue. So if you're talking about secular voters, I think that's one of the biggest things that we can push for right now.
I think that's great. And we can, Arizona, we're now considered a purple state. So we are very excited for this election. And I know that folks are working really hard here to elect secular government supporters, be them Democrats or Republicans. If they support secular government, then we're with them.
Well, and what you've been able to do in Arizona too, with working with friendly legislators and building allies, is a model for the rest of the country to build on. I mean, it's been really impressive to see the number of state legislators that are willing to take on our issues and speak openly about them, which you don't have in a lot of places. And to have it start in Arizona, which was pretty conservative when this started, is really, really impressive. And everybody there should be very proud of the work that all of you have done. And Tori, I know you're a big part of that too. So pat on the back for sure.
We have a whole team of people working out here. Thank you. Yeah, we take great pride in this, and we have more work to do. We definitely do, but we've been around now for 10 years. So over the past 10 years, we have it's taken time. To other states that are looking to do this, it takes time to build those relationships and build that brand over, several years, so that you get to the point where one lawmaker recently said to me, she said something like, that was before it was cool to be secular. I was cool before it was cool. I was like, that's great.
Fantastic.
Let's go to another question. Let's see. Ron Russell says, what action can I or should I take to encourage churches to value the safety of their community and not reopen in today's pandemic? Anything else to say about essential services of churches?
Yeah, great question. And obviously it's a huge issue, and it's one that FFRF has been working on. Never would have predicted it at the beginning of 2020 that this would have been the bulk of our work, but we actually, on the FFRF website, there's a whole page, COVID resources, under the legal tab, devoted to providing you, the local activists, with arguments and materials that you can use, not just for your local government officials, but for anybody. And so I would recommend checking out the COVID resources page on FFRF's website. There's a ton of really great information on there, and sort of lays out the different arguments for why it's really important that churches be included at stay-at-home orders, that the stay-at-home orders be enforced against churches. And I think that certainly applies to getting in touch with the churches themselves and pointing out these concerns. And there's actually a memo on there that you can download. You can email to the churches. You can pull the talking points that you like and rework them however you want. It's really alarming. Reuters had a really cool story, which we linked to on the COVID resources page. And it was sort of this interactive story where you can follow this one woman who attended 2 worship services and ended up infecting 1,200 people in South Korea. 60% of the confirmed COVID cases in South Korea were tied to one church cluster. So, and that's because churches are different, right? And I'm not saying they're different in that they should be treated specially and exempted. If anything, we should treat them more harshly, which they're arguing that can't be done. But think about all the community-oriented stuff that happens at a church, from passing a basket to get money, to eating something out of a guy's hand, to drinking from the same cup, to dipping in the same communal water. Like, all these different things are designed, almost intelligently or not, to spread germs. And so you've got, and let's say even if they follow all the social distancing rules and orders, they're still presented with all the other problems that even, let's say, a big store like Target or Kohl's or Home Depot would be presented with, where you only have one bathroom for the 400 people that are there or whatever. So it's if anything, churches are less safe than going to one of those big stores. So especially when you have people, I'm sure everybody saw the woman who said, "I'm covered in the blood of Jesus, so I'm not going to get sick," kind of stuff. But with what Trump said at his Friday briefing, saying we're going to open up the churches, and it really is alarming. And people ought to be doing all they can to support local churches that make the right call. And by support, really, I mean encourage. I'm not telling you to give money to churches. Don't do that. So, but encourage them to do the right thing, and maybe some positive reinforcement for those that do the right thing.
Right. There's just been so much anti-science backlash on this.
It's so weird that saying that we need to take the advice of doctors and listen to scientists in the middle of a pandemic is now a political stance. It's so bizarre. The world. So bizarre. Yeah.
I just watched the video of the reporter who was being heckled yesterday by protesters. They wanted him to take his mask off. And I don't know how we've got to this point, but I'm going to get to another question. Here we go. From Facebook, Jason Brooks asks, if Jefferson had a podcast today, what sorts of topics do you think he would focus on?
That's a fantastic question, and I've not heard it. Bravo for that question. I had the pleasure once. So Thomas Jefferson had Monticello, and then he has another place called Poplar Forest that most people don't know about. It's in Lynchburg, right near Liberty University, actually. And it's this really cool, tiny little, he called it a country house, but it's a mansion, and it's amazing. And I was able to sit in his dining room and had a salon that the place hosted on religious freedom, the genuine, what religious freedom really means, not the weaponized, politicized religious freedom of today. And so I had a conversation with these two other scholars, and then 50 people showed up. And it was just one of the coolest experiences of my life. You're in Thomas Jefferson's dining room talking about this issue that he really cared about. I mean, but he was something of a polymath. I think he'd have a real hard time narrowing and drilling down on one issue. And he was also a pretty quiet guy. So seeing him interviewing people would also be probably not the case. I'm not sure he would have a podcast. He kind of liked to be a little bit more of a puppet master the more I think about it. So yeah, I don't know.
I think he would have someone else do the podcast, but he would kind of.
Yeah, exactly. That is the way. Yep, that's the way that Jefferson would probably do it. Yeah.
On that note, too, back to Jefferson and the other founding fathers, how important it is, do you think, that they were slave owners or racist? How does that play into? It's
such a good question, and it's hard to deal with in a book like The Founding Myth because a lot of their ideas really were original and brilliant and amazing. But then you have people you have Jefferson, who he wrote about freedom and equality in these beautiful and poetic terms that we still echo and repeat today. And then he enslaved his own children, which is just mind-blowing. I can't even get around how deeply, deeply evil and immoral that is. So he was in a way, he was a coward. He was this intellectual coward and a moral coward. He was able to write about these things and then not execute them. So I think the way I might answer that question is to say they were not gods. These were flawed men. I'm not going to defend them by saying they were the product of their time or anything like that, but we shouldn't treat them like they were gods and shouldn't act like everything they did or said was right, including in the Constitution itself. I think that's a huge mistake, and I think it's part of the reason why we haven't been able to change a lot of the things that we as a country may need to change, and a lot of those things are being sort of highlighted in the current climate. But it was hard to write about because you can criticize them extensively, and they should be criticized extensively for that. But then you can also get lost writing a book like this about the founding and trying to focus in on one particular slice of what they did, which is, did they found this nation on Christian principles or not? And I do concede, by the way, several instances of heavy Christian influence in our founding, and slavery is one of them. The arguments for slavery and for maintaining slavery and even the slave trade to a certain extent were almost exclusively religious. And yes, there were many abolitionists who turned to the Bible to make their case as well, but the better side of the biblical argument was no doubt with the slavers and slaveholders. And I do touch on that quite a bit in the book. There are basically 2 chapters devoted to that. So it's a really hard issue to deal with, especially when you're trying to sort of focus your book on something else. But I do try to at least address it and say up front, this is a massive problem. And but I think it also contributes to our overall argument, which is that these weren't perfect. That they weren't gods, and we shouldn't be treating them as such.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much. Here's a question from Henry Geist. He says, it seems to me the Supreme Court needs to settle the order that the Constitution outranks religious preferences. What can FFRF do?
So, the Supreme Court needs a lot of help right now. They're doing a lot of things very, very badly, and especially when it comes to issues of both religious freedom and the separation of state and church. One of the things that I think the secular movement has done not the best job on is talking about state-church separation as it benefits believers, right? There is no such thing as the freedom of religion without a government that is free from religion. If you want genuine, true religious liberty, you have to have a secular government. And I go over that argument pretty extensively in the Founding Myth. You know, one of the 3 Catholic members of the Constitutional Convention, a guy named Daniel Carroll from Maryland, he said that the rights of conscience will little bear the lightest touch of the governmental hand. You know, and we've seen the Supreme Court turn its back on that ideal time and time again. And it's so frustrating because this is one of the unique things that the Founding Fathers did, one of the good, unique things that the Founding Fathers did when they were founding this country. They separated state and church in a way that we had never, that history, humanity had never seen before. And this is an American ideal that we are turning our back on. Not just the Supreme Court, but even our federal government as a whole right now, Congress and the Small Business Administration, the Trump administration, we are funding for the first time ever in the history of this nation preacher salaries and paying church mortgages with the PPP program, the Paycheck Protection Program that the Small Business Administration is putting together in the wake of this pandemic. So, I mean, we're moving away from this in many, many ways. And the personnel on the Supreme Court, the courts are not the neutral arbiters of justice that we think of or that we've been taught. And this Supreme Court in particular is not that. It is a political body. It is driven by political ideology. There are at least 5 ideologues on that court that are not driven by principle. They are not driven by legal principles, certainly. And most of the judges Trump has put in, those 200 lifetime appointments, are similarly situated. So unfortunately, we're not going to win this case in the courts. That said, I don't want people to get disheartened and down because we are going to win this fight. Absolutely. I have no doubt about that, but we're going to win it with demographics, not in the courts. And then we're going to have to go back and fix the courts. So don't be down by that answer.
Thank you. I know it's hard, and we always say we're in this. It's a long game. Mm-hmm. It's taken us a while to get here, and it's going to take some time to undo some of these things. Same thing here in Arizona. It's very. We've had 15 years of laws being passed continually that harm secular government, and we used to have a governor who would veto those laws. And when she left in 2009. It's been 11 years. So we're working hard to undo some of those things.
And to put it another way, I mean, they are doing massive damage right now. Don't get me wrong. Massive damage, but it's not to the point where we can't fix it yet. So we will still be able to salvage this thing.
Well, I've got a question from Stephanie Sings. This came from Facebook. She asks, back when moral character actually mattered in a political candidate, how did the social norm of religious belief equaling moral character come to be?
Yeah, one of the greatest tricks that religion has ever pulled is equating religion with morality. And, you know, I talk about this a lot in the Founding Myth. And I mentioned at the beginning the myth about Washington praying in the snow at Valley Forge. And we know that didn't happen. We know where that myth comes from. It comes from a book written by a guy named Parson Mason Weems. He was a clergyman. And I tell the story about this in the book. He didn't put that story in till like the 32nd edition of his book on Washington. He was known for just making stuff up. He is responsible for the Washington chopping down the cherry tree myth. Which is hilarious because it's about not lying and it's a total lie. And we know he's responsible for these things. And I think the reason that myth is so appealing, the reason it's been painted, Washington praying in the snow at Valley Forge, why it's been on a US postal stamp, why it hangs in the US Capitol in a stained glass window, is because Washington was this gigantic character. He looms so large in our public conscience. And by pulling this man down to his knees, quite literally and figuratively, all a politician has to do today to make themselves like George Washington is say that they care about prayer. And that's a betrayal of his that's a betrayal of Washington and his memory. I mean, this was a guy who we know eschewed and rejected any ostentation or shows of religion. I mean, when the few times he did attend church, he refused to take communion. I mean, he didn't have a clergyman at his deathbed. He rejected this kind of showy religiosity anyway, whether or not he was religious. My guess is probably not. But again, doesn't really matter. And so I think to bring it back to the question is, you have throughout our history these looming large characters, and now you don't have that, and they can make themselves just as good as any of our founders by making themselves seem religious. And the bait and switch on morality is even worse, because it allows them to get away with all manner of evil. I mean, Thomas Paine wrote, this is a paraphrase because Paine was awesome, but I can never get a lot of his. It's hard to get his quotes exactly right. Teach a people to accept that sins can be forgiven, and you will have sins in abundance. And I mean, that's basically what this is. All they have to do is pretend that they're religious, and then all of a sudden they're moral. They don't have to be moral. It's an easier way out. And I do talk about that a lot in the book. There's a whole chapter on that. I get into moral relativity and how it's really just moral relativism, or how moral absolutism is moral relativism masquerading around. Anyway, it also, all of that applies to God-given rights, which is a whole other argument. It's also in the founding myth. So anyway. Sorry.
Yes, and I have a few more questions from.
This is the problem when you give a lawyer a microphone and a captive audience. I mean,
well,
we get long-winded answers. Apologies.
Appreciate you. Well, I actually had my not a question, but my own. One of the things that I really took away from your book, which I took a lot away. But one of the things I took away that I just kind of wanted you to address briefly here for folks who haven't read the book is the word creator. What does it mean exactly? What do you think the founding fathers meant by that? And I know that you talk about it in your book, so I know the answer, but I wonder if you could just briefly give us a little bit of that, where it says we're endowed by our creator. What does that? What do they mean? Yeah.
It's a really interesting addition to the Declaration of Independence. I mentioned there's 4 different references in the Declaration supposedly to God. The laws of nature and of nature's God is the first one. That's the only one that Jefferson included in his original, by the way. Everything else was added later. And that's, very clearly not an invocation of any type of Christian God. The laws of nature and of nature's God. Anyway, then endowed by their creator, not our creator, their creator. And then supreme judge of the world and divine providence are the other 2. And really it was and is, it's a pre-Darwinian term. Before Darwin, nobody had an answer to the question why we were here. And I think for a lot of people, that was the reason to believe in some sort of supernatural answer to that question. But it didn't have to be supernatural for a lot of people. And there's a lot of poetry written into the Declaration as well. And we have to remember who the Declaration was written to. It was written to a candid world, and largely religious world. And it was written to a king to justify this action, and a king who was the defender of the faith and the head of a state church. So anyway, by creator, I think that they chose a term that was deliberately vague, that allowed readers to assign their own value and meaning to it. That is why I think, and this was added by Franklin and John Adams, later in the drafting process for the Declaration, probably when they were first going over Jefferson's draft as he brought it to them. Likely, the good money is probably on Franklin adding it. So,
all right. Well, here's another question for you off that topic. This is speaking of the Christian nationalists putting up the plaques. So we're going to go back to that. Where's the "In God We Trust"? Has it been effective, in your opinion, when groups like the Satanic Temple threaten to sue or are putting up their own plaques or trying to do that. Is that, how effective is that in your opinion? What are your thoughts?
I love Lucian. He and I are friendly. We chat regularly. I'm not at my office right now for obvious reasons, but in my office at FFRF, I have a big red button with the pentacle on it and the Baphomet head. It's a metaphorical button that I pound when I need to call in the Satanic Temple. And I mean, they do great work, especially for what they do. And but there's a time and a place when we call them in. So the goal always for FFRF and for, I think, other state church groups out there, and I think it should be the goal for secular America in general, is to have no religion displayed in the council chambers of your local county or city government, right? We don't want anybody's religion to be favored. We want no religion there at all because it's not the business of the government. And that's the way that we typically operate. So I'll give you an example. I litigated a case in Florida, and there was a public school there, and they were allowing a group to come in and distribute Bibles on Religious Freedom Day. And we said, you can't do that. That's not allowed. You can't let some strangers come in and distribute whatever they want to other people's children, especially the Bible. Not allowed. And the school said, no. We totally can do that. And if anybody wants to come in and distribute stuff, they can. So that's what we call an open forum. That means that the government's trying not to favor religion. They're trying to say anybody can come in and do it. It's a sort of a lazy way out for them, I'll say. And we said, okay, fine. Well, we're going to distribute Thomas Paine's Rights of Man. We're going to distribute this, all these. And they censored like half the stuff we wanted to distribute. And they said, you can't do that. We will not allow you to bring this stuff in and give it to kids. For instance, one of the things FFRF wanted to distribute was our X-rated Bible pamphlet, which is just quotes from the Bible that are about sex. And they said, you can't distribute that. It's X-rated. It's everything you already let be distributed because it's all stuff from the Bible. And they said no. Another thing they wouldn't let us distribute, I don't remember what it was precisely, but they said, you can't distribute it because the claim that Jesus did not die, was not crucified, and did not rise from the dead is age inappropriate. Okay, so you can distribute the Bible, which says that a guy was tortured to death and then rose from the dead zombie-like, totally fine. Saying that didn't happen is age inappropriate. Okay, so we sued them because they were violating our free speech rights. And the whole time we're going through this case, I'm saying to the school district, look, you don't have to do this. All you have to do is close this forum down and say that you're not going to let them distribute Bibles and this can all end right now. And they said, no, we could never do that. This is so important. I mean, where else are kids going to get a copy of the most widely available book in the whole world? So anyway, go through the whole litigation. We win. We're able to distribute whatever we want in the schools. And still they won't shut it down. So I hit the button on my desk. And Lucian comes in and says, hey, we want to distribute our coloring book from the Satanic Temple to your kids. And the town and the community in Orange County, Florida just went berserk, just completely nuts. Like 200 people showed up to the next school board meeting, and the school board immediately said, all distributions are off. And that was what we asked for and wanted from the very beginning, but we had to go through this whole case to do it. So that's where it really is valuable to have the Satanic Temple doing the work that they do. And I mean, it's they're so much, apparently believers are so much more scared of the devil than they are people who don't believe in anything. So, yeah.
Well, we're running low on time. I just have two more questions from the audience for you.
I'm good to go.
Okay, good. One is super easy, so I'll save that one for last. This one is from Luke Douglas. He says, as we see the federal court system moving to the right and likely set to continue, what do you see in the strategic future of the movement? And do you think we need to focus more on lobbying, electioneering, et cetera, to make up for lost ground in the court?
Yeah, I mean, there are fixes to the court problem right now. I don't like to talk about it too much, but I'll say this. Our courts are overworked as it is. We could, for instance, double the size of the judiciary tomorrow, and they would still take a couple years to catch up on the backlog of cases that they have. Now, we wouldn't want to do that tomorrow, but we might want to do it in like 6 months. So I'll just leave it at that. I mean, there does need to be a fix for the courts, because no matter how much electioneering you do, and no matter how good this is one of the frustrating things for me to see during the debates recently, was this was not talked about at all. And no matter how good your plans are for whatever it is that you care about, they don't matter if you've got a court system that's guaranteed to strike those plans down. So we do need a fix for the courts. And I know, I can tell you that there are, and I'm not talking about FFRF here, though we are involved. There are hundreds of groups out there talking about this behind the scenes and trying to work with legislators and figure this out. So all I can say is nobody's really talking about that publicly for good reason, but it is being talked about a lot behind closed doors.
Okay, good answer. So I know I promised you an easy question, which is coming. But before we do that, it appears that the big chatter on Facebook right now is, what is your mug? They want to see your mug that you're drinking out of. Like, very important.
This is the Marauders Map. I got this at a Harry Potter World, or whatever you call it. I solemnly swear that I'm up to no good. I love it because it's huge, first of all, and lawyers, so caffeine. And then it's just awesome. There's tons of great detail on that. I'm a Harry Potter nerd, and Harry Potter World was fantastic. So yeah, this is my I solemnly swear that I'm up to no good mug.
Well, it's very popular. All right, last question. This is from Rada from Facebook. She wants to know if there will be a convention for FFRF this fall.
Great question.
Virtual or in person? Yeah,
great question. I'm so excited for our convention this year. I mean, the names that we have: John Irving, which is, fantastic writer. Well, I guess maybe I shouldn't pump it up because I don't know the answer to the question. We're going to do whatever is best in terms of keeping everybody safe and healthy. So we're not going to risk any of our members' lives or any of our speakers' lives. And those are ongoing conversations. I don't know the answer. FFRF will definitely let everybody know as soon as possible. But I know there's just a ton of work being done behind the scenes on that. I mean, Margaret Atwood is supposed to be there. It's supposed to be, this huge sort of crowning jewel in the crown of FFRF's convention. So if we can make it happen, I think we want to, but we're certainly not going to risk anybody's life or health to do something like that. So.
Okay, so we'll figure that out. I know with other groups I'm working with too, we're all kind of debating this right now. Yeah.
I mean, it's an ongoing thing, and we just don't know what things are going to look like. I mean, it's not till November, so we do still have some time to figure it out. But yeah. I mean, I hope so, but we're not gonna put anybody in a difficult position of having to risk their health. I mean, I had to go risk my health to go vote, and we're not going to do that to anybody. So. All
right. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to show your book again.
This is
Andrew's book.
And if you want a copy signed, go to ffrf.org and write a note when you're checking out. Otherwise, get it on Amazon. You can get it on bookshop.org and support your local bookstores. If you already have a copy and you liked it, please do go leave a review. Please do that. It really is important. If you have a copy and you didn't like it, don't leave a review. You don't need to. But if you enjoyed it, reviews on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or Goodreads, whatever, please do that. It really is helpful to writers, especially, again, when everybody's struggling right now. So that would be much appreciated.
Awesome. Thank you. So on behalf of Secular Coalition for Arizona, and also, I forgot to introduce myself earlier, but I'm also on the board of our local FFRF chapter here. So that we have an FFRF local chapter. It's called the Valley of the Sun chapter. I know you came out to launch us last year. On behalf of both groups, I want to thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us. I want to thank all of our participants on the line. We had a steady stream of participants the whole time. Nobody left us, really. So I think it was a real success. Thank you so much. And do you have any website or anything you want to direct people to if they...
I would really love, you know, in addition to getting your copy of the founding myth, I would really love for everybody to join FFRF. I mean, especially now, I know money's tight and times are hard, but it is for everyone, and especially for the nonprofits out there. And we really do need your help now more than ever with how much work we're doing. So if you have thought in the past about joining FFRF and maybe haven't, please do that. If you're already a member, please consider, you know, increasing your membership or adding an additional donation or something like that. We would really greatly appreciate it right now. If you want to keep state and church separate and educate the public about what it is to be a non-believer, we are your group, and we are your voice. So please join us.
All right, thank you. And for everyone on the line, join us on Thursday, May 28th at 7 p.m. for our Secular Elected Officials Town Hall that we're doing along with the Center for Free Thought Equality and several other groups here locally as well. So we hope to see you then. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.